Chris loves Shanann.
Oh God, he loved her. Yes, I believe he loved her at first. I believe he did. But I think as the years went on, I think it just being in that kind of a relationship, which the social worker even said that marriage should have ended a long time ago.
Shanann's pregnancy, and what did Chris tell you about that? Was he excited?
No, I don't think he was. I think it was a shock to him. And he said that they have been talking about divorce, that they are not compatible anymore, and he was not happy anymore. And I finally thought, he's finally seen the light.
And I take it Chris had never been in trouble with the law?
Never. He's got one speeding ticket and didn't even know about that.
No one expected the woman in the shadows to ever speak. Cindy Watts had lived for years behind the headlines, whispered about in online forums, dissected by strangers who claimed to know her story. Yet the real truth, her truth, had been buried under grief, loyalty, and public judgment. For years, she watched her family unravel, powerless to stop it, and every moment since had been a careful dance between silence and survival. Cindy's world had shattered in ways most could not imagine. She mourned the grandchildren she lost, the innocent lives stolen, while still struggling to comprehend the son she raised, a son whose actions left the world shocked and broken. Friends disappeared. Family conversations became strained. The media scrutinized her every word, every gesture, as if grief could be measured like a scorecard. Yet they never saw the private pain, the inner conflict, the moments where loyalty clashed with heartbreak. If you want to hear the side of the story no one has dared to tell, subscribe now, because this story is more complicated than the headline suggested. For Cindy, silence was both protection and prison. It shielded her from judgment, but it also left her alone with questions, regrets, and truths she could no longer ignore. And now, after years of living in the shadows of a tragedy the world tried to simplify, she is breaking that silence. What she reveals is raw, unsettling, and deeply human, the story they buried, finally brought into the light. Cindy Watts had lived in the eye of a storm she never asked for. The world had already decided who she was, some labeled her loyal, others cold, but the reality was far more complicated. Every day since the tragedy brought a fresh wave of judgment. Social media dissected her words, news outlets replayed her interviews endlessly, and even friends and extended family seemed unsure how to approach her. Every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word was scrutinized as though grief could be measured like a report card, yet no one truly understood the weight she carried. Isolation became her constant companion. Calls went unanswered, invitations vanished, and the familiar world she once knew was replaced with suspicion, whispers, and second guesses. Cindy mourned her grandchildren in silence, carrying a pain that no public statement could ever convey. She loved her son, Chris, fiercely, but the world saw that loyalty as a fault, a sign that she condoned the unthinkable. Inside, she wrestled with an impossible truth: the family she had known was gone, and she had to navigate a reality that demanded explanation, judgment, and emotional fortitude she had never trained for. As Cindy stepped into this new reality, she realized that surviving it required more than grief. It required understanding the complex dynamics that had shaped her son and their family. Every memory of Chris as a child, every interaction with Shanann, every moment she had tried to protect or guide him replayed in her mind. And while the public was quick to judge, Cindy had a story they would never see, a perspective that challenged assumptions, exposed hidden pressures, and revealed the emotional fractures beneath the headlines. The truth she carried was not easy, and it was not clean. But Cindy Watts was finally ready to speak, to share what had been buried for years, and to show that the story behind Chris Watts was more nuanced, and more haunting, than anyone realized. Chris Watts' story had always been told through headlines, courtroom footage, and viral videos, but Cindy Watts knew there was far more beneath the surface. From her perspective, the events that unfolded were not just the result of one man's choices, but the culmination of years of emotional pressure, unresolved conflict, and toxic family dynamics. She reflected on how the expectations, arguments, and silent tensions had shaped Chris, how he had been caught between her love, her rules, and Shanann's demands, all while trying to navigate a world he could barely control. Cindy saw a man who had learned to survive through avoidance. Every conflict, every difficult conversation, every moment of discomfort had been met with silence or deflection. He had become skilled at hiding his emotions, at masking fear, guilt, and frustration behind polite nods and empty reassurances. Cindy wondered how much of what the public considered coldness was actually a survival mechanism, a man desperately trying to keep peace between two worlds that were tearing him apart. The toxic pressures were subtle but relentless. Cindy's concern, intended as guidance, could have felt like control. Shanann's drive for clarity and order may have felt like judgment or resentment. And Chris, caught in the middle, retreated deeper into himself, compartmentalizing feelings, masking truths, and building walls that no one could penetrate. Cindy realized that her own silence, while protective, may have unintentionally reinforced the emotional isolation that ultimately consumed her son. If this story is making you question everything you thought you knew about the Watts family, like this video, it helps bring hidden truths to more people. Through Cindy's eyes, the story was no longer black and white. It was a portrait of family pressure, miscommunication, and the quiet escalation of emotional tension. She saw the cracks that no one else saw, the warning signs ignored, and the ways in which silence, the thing Chris had relied on for years, had finally become destructive. And now, speaking out, Cindy began to untangle the threads of a story that had been buried far too long. Cindy Watts had carried the weight of judgment for years, but breaking her silence revealed just how heavy that burden had been. She spoke of grief that never fully fades, of loyalty that clashed with heartbreak, and of the impossible position she had been forced into, mourning the grandchildren she had lost while still feeling love for the son who caused the tragedy. Every word she shared was measured, every story carefully told, because she knew the world would be listening with skepticism, ready to condemn before understanding. Family relationships had been strained long before the crime, but the aftermath magnified every fracture. Extended relatives whispered in corners, friends kept their distance, and even casual acquaintances treated her with caution. Cindy's days became a careful navigation between appearances and reality. Each media interview, each statement, each photo was another test of how to balance her grief, her loyalty, and the scrutiny of a public eager for answers and eager to judge. The private cost of this attention was immense, yet Cindy pressed on, determined to tell her story on her terms. Through her words, the audience began to see the nuanced pressures that had shaped Chris Watts. Cindy spoke about the quiet conflicts, the emotional tensions, and the difficult moments that no headline could capture. She revealed how silence, avoidance, and unresolved resentment had festered in their family, creating a chain of consequences that ultimately led to tragedy. Cindy's reflections highlighted that toxic dynamics do not vanish after disaster, they linger, shaping relationships and influencing decisions in ways that are not always obvious. By the end of this chapter, Cindy's perspective became clear. Surviving the public eye required resilience she had never imagined needing, and speaking out was both liberation and confrontation. The story she had carried alone for so long was finally emerging, not as a defense of her son, but as a revelation of the unseen pressures, emotional struggles, and human complexity behind one of the most infamous family tragedies in recent history. The story Cindy Watts finally shared was not one of simple answers or clear villains. It was a portrait of grief, loyalty, and the quiet forces that shape human behavior, a story that had been buried beneath headlines, rumors, and public judgment for years. Cindy reflected on the lasting consequences of silence, miscommunication, and unresolved tension within the family, revealing the complex emotional web that had influenced her son and shaped the tragedy. Her words were raw, honest, and deeply human, offering a perspective few had considered, and none had fully understood. Even as she spoke, Cindy acknowledged the weight of public opinion. Friends, family, and strangers all had their assumptions, but her truth existed beyond judgment. She mourned her grandchildren, carried the burden of her son's actions, and faced the scrutiny of a world eager to simplify the story into black and white. Yet she remained steadfast, emphasizing that understanding does not equal excusing, and insight does not erase pain. Her reflections were a testament to the complexity of family, the lingering effects of toxic dynamics, and the human tendency to retreat into silence when pressure becomes unbearable. If you stayed until the end, share this story, because sometimes the side of the story that was buried deserves to be heard. Cindy Watts' account serves as a reminder that tragedy often hides layers we cannot see, and that family, loyalty, and grief are rarely as simple as they appear. The Watts case continues to resonate not just as a shocking crime, but as a cautionary tale about the power of silence, the dangers of unresolved tension, and the human cost of relationships left unexamined. Cindy's voice, finally breaking through, offers insight, reflection, and a haunting reminder that the truth is always more complicated than the story we are first told.